It's the 10th of January 2022. It's Monday morning. I'm Anthony Davis, and you're very welcome to join us from wherever you are. I'm in Los Angeles, California. You may be in the East Coast or somewhere in Middle America, in which case we share the time zone, give or take an hour here or there. So it's 9 a.m. here, and wherever you are, then good morning or good afternoon. Share your lunch hour or your mid-morning with us as we work our way through the morning papers and have just a little chat about what's happening across the country. This is the only place where you can talk back and listen to hosts live on your device and kind of get in, play along. Join in, if you know what I mean. So I'm here every morning, 9 a.m. PST. We're going to take a look at the Ukraine crisis, which continues, and we're going to ask why the Russia-US talks may prove crucial. Also, following the heartbreaking news of the New York fire, in which 19 people were killed in an apartment block, we'll be asking, do you know how to plan for fire? Have you got a safe route? Have you talked through it with your children or neighbors? And also, planet warming emissions surged faster in the US than expected in 2021. So, what does that mean for Joe Biden's climate change promises? And finally, we're going to look at the life of Bob Saget. Is that how you say his surname? Is it Saget? Yeah, I guess it is. The American actor and comedian made famous by the sitcom Full House. He's sadly been found dead at the age of 65 in his hotel room. So those are the stories that are making the headlines this morning. That's what we'll be discussing. And we're going to jump straight into the newspapers this morning. We're going to go to Albany in New York for the Times Union and see what's happening there. Kobe has joined us. Good morning, Kobe. Using your real name this morning, which I think is wonderful. Kind of finally come out of the shadows. Just turning on my big clock here. I like a big clock. Who doesn't like a big clock? Hang on. Yes, this chair is... the ergonomics of the show are very important. I hope you're comfortable. I make a living. Times Union this morning leads with scale up to fight gun violence. The state's approach to gun violence during the COVID-19 pandemic included declaring it both a public health crisis and an epidemic. Those official declarations freed up tens of millions of dollars and bolstered state-run programs and community-based organizations that advocates have said can reduce gun violence if those programs are fully funded. And with much of the funding set to run out, Governor Kathy Hochul says she intends to sustain most of the community-based funding while expanding resources for law enforcement and local governments to battle gun violence. I mean, look, how do you battle gun violence when guns are everywhere? How do you battle gun violence when you can buy a gun in a corner shop? How do you battle gun violence when people claim that the Constitution gives them the right to bear arms? I mean, it's just so contradictory to me. And I speak as someone who comes from a country where guns have never been part of our culture. Well, certainly contemporary culture, When I tell American friends that the British police do not have guns, they look at me like I'm crazy. Security guards don't have guns. Police don't have guns. Even I was trying to think, do the people protecting the Prime Minister have guns? I guess they do. But they're not on show. The people that protect the Prime Minister... Carla, do you know if the people who protect the Prime Minister have guns? They must have. They must have one of those little pistols, in a holster under here. They certainly don't look like they carry guns. Some of them are kind of funny-looking guys. And girls. Occasionally girls. Very rarely girls. But it's just interesting to me that, we have operated as a culture... Because, you see, our culture is, let's say hypothetically that someone tries to shoot at Boris Johnson. The reaction from the police would not be to execute the person who just shot at him. The culture would be to apprehend the person who just shot at him. We like to put people on trial. We don't like to just... It's not like an eye for an eye. Oh, there's a law in England that says private close... Oh, no, hang on, that's private close protection. That's not prime ministers. That's for... That's for citizens. That's private citizens who have close protection. That's people like, Yeah, but that's private close protection. We want to know about civil, civic close protection and the like. I reckon that maybe, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to make stuff up, but I would say maybe they are armed. But can you imagine, like, considering that in America the president has a motorcade that is like 30 vehicles long, where it has like a whole, they bring with them an entire truckload of armed officers in like armed riot gear that seem to follow the car around. And then, of course, they have all the military and they have all of the, the nuclear codes and all of that stuff. I mean, I know England is a smaller country, and I don't like to compare all the time, but I do think it's interesting because my American friends seem to know very little about the culture of protection, firearms, weaponry, all of that stuff outside of America. They just presume that everyone is the same, and they really aren't. And I've always liked the fact that I don't have to be scared of the police because I'm not worried about being murdered. Now, I appreciate I'm a white man, so it makes quite a difference. But even black people in Britain don't have to worry about being executed in the street by the police. It just wouldn't happen. They might get tasered, which, is not fatal. And worst case scenario is that they might get hit with a baton. We have these batons, extendable batons, but they only use those for riots. They would never raise their baton in like a regular, vehicle stop. It's very interesting, isn't it? The difference between the cultures. And, this is the thing with the gun violence in America. It's like everyone's got guns. Even people that don't use them. Here in California, there are more guns registered in California than any other state in the US. You know why? Because people here bother to register them. That's why. Right? So there's probably not more guns here, but there's more registered guns here. And people have to keep them locked up. I would never get a gun. I would never get a gun. Would you? I mean, do you have one? I don't know anyone who has a gun. No. At least I don't think so. I mean, I just don't know. I don't know that many people for a start, but I mean, to me, it's like another thing. Here, I had a friend of a friend who someone tried to break and enter into their property. And when the police came, he said to the police, what can I do to make this safer? And the police said, get a gun. That was the advice of the LAPD. Get a gun. It's beggar's belief, isn't it? Also on the Times Union front page this morning, amid surge, a sign of hope despite spike, states seeing lower percentage of fatalities than winter 2021. Kirby says, are you white knight? What does that even mean? I'd love to know. You can tell me. I don't know what that is. Reservation system looms for hiking trails. A state advisory group focusing on how to ease overcrowding in Catskills Park is tentatively recommending a pilot reservation system for some trailhead parking lots. The Catskills Strategic Advisory Group released its interim report on Thursday, which recommends ways to ease congestion on trails, roadways, and parking lots, and to educate visitors about safety and respecting the outdoors. Isn't the whole point of going to the Catskill Mountains and anywhere that is rural and a national park the idea that you don't really have to engage with the internet? Is that you can just switch everything off and just head for the mountains? The idea of having to pre-reserve your parking spot online, doesn't that defeat the object of the joy of heading for the hills? Just a thought. Okay, let's look at the Press and Sun Bulletin now. This is for Binghamton, New York. Dealing with violence is the headline. Binghamton High School addresses safety measures and parent concerns. It says when students walked through the school doors for the first time in over 2 weeks, they, along with the staff, were still reeling from a slew of violent events that forced the school to return to remote learning and work on implementing additional safety measures. 4 days later, the administration and school community were faced with yet another blow. An 18-year-old student was shot near the high school. Now, as the city district and parents try to move forward with the administration's increased safety protocols in hand, some parents are saying it is not enough. Here is what we know about the high school's new safety measures. I mean, it's just so tragic that I'm even having to read this out. Do you know what I mean? They're installing scanning equipment. All students have to wear ID badges. More staff members patrolling the hallways. I mean, is it a school or a state penitentiary? Yeah, I guess if you over-police a space, it makes people more keen to kind of evade the rules, right? Psychologically, you're more likely to want to cause trouble if you know that there's a lot of, a kind of heavy-handed attitude to discipline. Because, people who want to break the rules are rebellious by nature. So if you raise the stakes, raise the jeopardy, then your perpetrator is going to raise their stakes as well. Prospects for talks bleak on the front of the Press and Sun Bulletin this morning. This is another story about Ukraine. We'll talk about this a bit later. But it says, with much at risk and both warning of dire consequences of failure, the United States and Russia have been positioning themselves for what will be a nearly unprecedented flurry of activity in Europe this week. Through the immediacy of the threat of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, will top the agenda in a series of high-level meetings that get underway on Monday. There's a litany of festering but largely unrelated disputes ranging from arms control to cybercrime and diplomatic issues for Washington and Moscow to overcome if tensions are to ease. And New York reopens rent aid applications. Says New Yorkers will again have the chance to apply for pandemic rental aid and temporary protection from eviction under a state court order issued on Thursday. Do you know, I was watching this interview, a very good interview with what's her name? Fran Lebowitz. And she was saying, isn't it crazy how everybody complains about the cost of rent in New York, yet everyone lives in New York? Like, how do they afford it? Like, she said everyone's moaning about the cost of living there. What is going on with this chair? Definitely something up with it. Just suddenly, dropped. So how is it possible that everyone can moan about the high cost of rent there, and yet everybody somehow manages to stay living there? Is it that they're living in such squalor or such terrible conditions, living 5 or 6 to a 2-bedroom apartment? Is that what's happening? Be interesting to know. Because it is insane there. I mean, I have a little experience in New York. I have a friend who owns an apartment there who's currently trying to sell it. And I have a friend who lived there for a while, and they Airbnb'd a place. And the price of the Airbnb was insane. It was insane. For a relatively small place, Okay, let's look at... I think that there is an argument, there's a kind of economic argument to say that if you have empty properties at the top end of the property market, that causes a knock-on effect of poorer properties, properties for poorer people down the lower end. They say that, everybody should be housed. You shouldn't leave properties empty. But, some people argue whether this works, because it's a similar thing to trickle-down economics, right? Which obviously doesn't work. It's been proven that doesn't work. And yet, I don't know enough about how it works with housing stock. But fundamentally in London, you have people in their 30s and 40s who by traditional standards should now own a property and be paying a mortgage, who are still renting a room in a shared house because the wages don't support the opportunity to have their own place. So you either get a very small one-bedroom or studio apartment and live alone, but in one room effectively, or you rent with a bunch of other adults, which, in terms of your dignity, it's, it kind of undermines your dignity as an adult, especially as a middle-aged person, having to have shelves in the refrigerator with a name on whose shelf it is, and, who's stolen my toilet paper. I mean, come on. It's so important. It's so important that we, we make the effort to remind the authorities that wages need to rise with inflation. Because all of these adjustments that they're making is all about wages and the cost of living. And I've always said that this is the fundamental backbone of all of our problems in society. The cost of living went up, wages stayed the same. So, and then we have to it's a bit like the fact that, they're saying get a COVID test, and you can't buy them. And if you can buy them, they're $24. Why does the average person have to foot that bill? They can't afford it. I mean, most average working people that I have come into contact with haven't been vaccinated because they haven't had a chance to. They're like, when am I supposed to take time off work to go get vaccinated? Bernie Sanders came out with a good thing this morning. Did you see this, Carla? What Bernie said today about the Democrats? Because, Bernie Sanders is an independent. But Sanders this morning came out and he basically said the Democratic Party, has turned its back on the working class. He called on Democrats to make a major course correction that focuses on fighting for America's working class and standing up to powerful corporate interests, because the Democrats' legislative agenda has stalled and their party faces tough prospects in this November's elections. They say the White House is likely to see his comments as a shot across the bow by the left wing of a party increasingly frustrated at how centrist Democrats have managed to scupper or delay huge chunks of Biden's domestic policy plans. Oh, Bernie is the real... The reason you can tell Bernie is the real deal is if you see interviews with him from 30 years ago, he's saying exactly the same thing. His message has never, ever changed. But Bernie suffers this kind of socialist amnesia that they have in America, where they think that socialism is kind of exclusive. That, socialism, they don't understand that socialism, doesn't exist anymore in the modern day because capitalism is too prevalent. So you have elements of socialism, like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and military service. These are all elements or aspects of socialism. And what Bernie is not advocating for is, taking the country into some kind of communist era. That's not what he advocates for, but that's what his critics have stamped on him. He's a democratic socialist. That's what he refers to himself as. Oh yes, that photo of him sitting on that little chair on Inauguration Day. Yeah, that's like his only coat. That's his only coat. I mean, he's a good guy. He is a good guy, but the problem is he's been a bit like Dr. Anthony Fauci. Sanders and Fauci have been painted by the right as dangerous, evil, and dangerous people wanting to take away your freedom. That is how the right-wing media and rhetoric describes these two very sweet, elderly people who've devoted their lives to helping people. There really is a fundamental desire by many Americans to not help people. And I don't believe that is true on an individual basis. I think that, if there was a situation where somebody needed help, hopefully that person would be helped on the street or something. I think that is inbuilt with all of us. But politically and culturally, this desire to not want to pay for other people's health insurance People don't understand it. They just don't understand it here. Did you see the video of the guy who crashed an aeroplane in California yesterday? Did you hear about this? This is an example of helping people. A guy was flying a light aircraft and he lost power and he landed, and guess where he landed? On a level crossing. He crashed his plane on a level crossing. And the police managed to get to him and free him 7 seconds before a gigantic train smashed into the aeroplane and scattered. I mean, I tweeted a video of it from body cam footage this morning. They got that guy out and they ran, and the plane was smashed to smithereens. I mean, it was pretty beaten up from the crash. But, you know, this was an example in my mind of people helping people. Now, I know that these were uniformed people. I know it was their job. But they risked their lives because the train was coming and they could hear the train coming. And the train could not stop. There was no way of stopping that train. And, you know, this is where I think human endeavor meets a kind of social responsibility. This is kind of what we need to remind ourselves of, that humanity is fundamentally good. And no political rhetoric or the ownership of guns or any of these things should dampen the goodness of humanity. This is Backchannel. It's 9:22 here on the West Coast. It's 12:22 Eastern. It's the 10th of January, 2022. Stacey, good morning. She has to leave in a little while, but thank you. Kobe's saying, are you watching the game tonight? I don't know what game that is. I don't watch any sport. I don't really know anything about it. I wish I had the chance. Sadly not. Stacey's having chicken with chips and cookies. Well, now that that's been announced on this show, everybody knows. Everybody knows. And then, of course, we come to the story of this high-rise blaze in the Bronx yesterday. It started as a lazy Sunday morning, cold and grey outside. Residents at the Twin Parks Northwest Tower in the Bronx awoke to children and chores, and then the morning twisted in an instant into a blackening nightmare. A resident for more than 20 years, Wesley Patterson, shuffled into his bathroom to wash up at around 11 a.m. When his girlfriend knocked on the door. She said she'd just looked out the window and she'd seen flames coming out of the apartment next door. Thick black smoke began to flood their apartment. Within seconds, Mr. Patterson could barely see his girlfriend or her brother. And they were on the other side of the room. We were just trying to breathe, he said. He rushed them to a back window and the promise of fresh air and some relief. That window was very hot to the touch, burning his hands, but he fought it open. The move backfired. Smoke began flooding into the apartment. He slammed the window back down. I mean, people just don't know what to do they? You know, you don't open a window in this kind of situation. But how would they know that? You know, you have to head for the exit. You see a flame anywhere, you head for the exit straight away. The problem with, you know, I know a little bit about this fire. The problem with this fire was the fire did not spread. The fire was contained to 1 or 2 apartments. But because the door was open of the apartment, and because there was no fire door in the hallway, the entire building got flooded with smoke. And in these situations, you know, it's not the fire that's really the danger, it's the smoke. Frantic scenes like this were playing out in apartments throughout the 19-story building as parents and children sought escape from homes that were suddenly black and airless. So, 19 people have died in the city's worst fire in decades, including 9 children, when a malfunctioning space heater sent smoke billowing through the Bronx high-rise, the deadliest fire New York City had seen in more than 3 decades. 44 people were injured, 13 of them critically, after the occupants of the 3rd-floor apartment where the fire started fled without closing the door behind them. The smoke from the fire spread to the top of the 19-story building, darkening hallways and stairwells and shocking residents who had not heard the fire alarms. Who had heard the fire alarms but did not immediately react because they'd grown accustomed to frequent alarms in the building. Yeah. I've worked in buildings where the alarm goes off and you're like, is this a test? Is this a accidental, no one really wants to leave. But yet again, this is an example of the poor being left to die. And a lot of residents of this building were from the Gambia in Africa. And, unfortunately, we had the same in London. We had an apartment block in London called the Grenfell Tower that caught fire about 4 years ago and, literally killed, was it like nearly 200 people, I think. And that was because of the cladding that was used on the exterior of the building was not flame retardant. It was cheap because the building was renovated and they refabricated the building with cheap, flammable material. And so when a fire started, the entire building goes up in flames within minutes. And because of cuts to local services, there's not enough fire, because in London, they've closed many of the fire stations. So the fire service also had to carry some of the blame. And yeah, it was mainly children and disabled people that were affected by the Grenfell fire in London. And that's a tower, I was born very close to that tower. I grew up in that part of London, so, that tower was always part of my history. Are they knocking that down? I think they were going to knock it down, weren't they? They're not, they're doing it up. Right. I don't know who would want to live in that tower. I think they'd be better just knocking it down and starting over, So there we go. That's the New York Times this morning, leading with this photograph of firefighters responding to the blaze on East 181st Street on Sunday, which found victims on every floor of the 19-story building. And, this is the tragedy of poor people living in low-cost housing. This place was built 20 years ago. Well, no more. I think it was built in the 70s or something as low-cost housing. And, invariably the smoke alarms are not working properly, and the fire doors, you're supposed to have fire doors that shut on a spring loaded just to shut in the hallways. And they don't know if that was working or not. Probably not by the sounds of things. The Dothan Eagle this morning leads the special session possible. Relief fund spending would be on agenda. This is a story out of Montgomery, Alabama. Alabama lawmakers say there may be a special session on how to spend the state's remaining pandemic relief funds. Key lawmakers said they are in discussions with the governor's office calling on a special session in which lawmakers would focus only on the relief money allocation during a portion of the upcoming regular session that begins on Tuesday. This is all part of the American Rescue Plan. I mean, there's a theme here. Have you noticed the theme? That people don't have enough money to live on. Wages do not allow people to live. And even if you work, it's not enough. And the cost of living, this kind of, government having to come up with schemes left, right, and center, especially during the pandemic, to support people. People are so poor. Never really talk about it in America. In England we do. We refer to relative poverty, which is where you can have a job and have a home, and you still can't really afford. You have no spare money. You have no disposable income. You can't afford luxury items. You are living in relative poverty. But in America, I don't really hear that so much. There's a lot of talk about the middle classes, and maybe it's just aspirational. Maybe if you don't mention the poor, then they don't exist. And yet, then you have people complaining about homelessness. And it's like, well, talk about it. Oh, there's no people with disabilities in America. They're all hidden. No one speaks of those people. I mean, at least, when I watch the news, like British news, they're always doing stories about disabled people who are struggling to have access. Like our subway network in the in London, only has like 20% of the subway stations had disabled access, meaning that people who are wheelchair users couldn't get on the subway. Because so many of these stations, you had to walk down a gazillion stairs or take an escalator. So, that over time they are investing money in putting in elevators. But it's a long process. And even curbs, they try and make the curb of the sidewalks accessible, and they're trying so hard to do that. So, you have a curb with little raised dots in it, which is for blind people to know when they're walking that they've got to the end of the sidewalk and that the road is coming, little raised sections. And so, I see so little of that on US sidewalks. They're starting to do it, but they are literally 30 years behind the rest of the world. Again, it's fascinating. If you only live here and you don't travel, you wouldn't know that the rest of the world, it's a bit like, I see this word handicapped used here in America all the time. And it's like that word is considered so offensive elsewhere. If you are handicapped, it means that you are in some way inferior. It's like, wow, fascinating. Demand exceeds supply. As the Omicron variant sends US COVID case numbers soaring to new records and drugstores and walk-in clinics clamour for test kits, suppliers have been struggling with their own mounting problems. Infected workers, delayed government authorizations for new tests, and the pressure of panic buying and hoarding have left these companies scrambling. Vault Health, a telehealth company that now sells tests, has found itself shuffling test samples across the country as sick lab workers who usually process its at-home PCR test stay home. In New Jersey, one of the labs Vault regularly contracts, with more than 40% of its workforce out with COVID recently, said Jason Feldman, the company's chief executive officer. Vault had to route tests from the Northeast to the Midwest, where there are fewer COVID-19 cases. That, combined with the volume of tests, has led to a delay in processing. And then, of course, there's the home tests, which you cannot get for love nor money. Can you get them in England now, Carla? Do they still have access to home tests? Because here they're just completely sold out. You just can't get one. You do. But if you needed to order more, would you be able to? Amazing. Right. There's just no supply here. I mean, there isn't a solitary test now anywhere. Like, literally all sold out. And the moment they get some in, they sell out in a moment. I have 4 packs stockpiled. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, let's see what's next. Stacey has to go. Okay, have a good day, Stacey. Thank you for spending your time with us. All right, next is the LA Times, which is kind of where I am here in Los Angeles. Let's have a look. See what the LA Times has to offer. It's 9:35, by the way, on this Monday morning. Rules target smaller boats. It says more than 2 years after the Conception fire, Coast Guard unveils interim regulations to enhance vessel safety. This is rules for small boats more than 2 years after the deadliest maritime disaster in modern California history, more than a year after Congress passed legislation requiring it to do so. It says the interim rules are set to go into effect on the 28th of March. They require boat operators to install fire detection systems and extinguishers to ensure proper escape routes are available and develop procedures for handling potentially dangerous items such as rechargeable batteries, among other requirements. They come in response to the Labor Day fire aboard the Conception dive boat off the Channel Islands, which left 33 passengers and 1 crew member dead and exposed serious flaws in boat safety, later detailed by a series of Times reports and an investigation by the NTSB. Party's election gloom builds. This is a story about the Democrats who've long known history is not on their side in the 2022 midterm election. But as they enter this campaign year, the steep climb to keep their majorities in Congress appears even more daunting, with the COVID-19 pandemic stubbornly persistent and voters concerned over inflation and crime. The unsettled national climate, if it holds in November, will probably favor Republicans, who need just 5 additional seats to take control of the U.S. House and only 1 more for a majority in the Senate. The sitting president's party almost always loses ground in midterm elections, doing so in all but 2 such contests since the end of World War II. And Democrats hoping to buck precedent have few easy fixes for the problems on voter minds for Biden's underwater approval ratings. I mean, I have lots of thoughts about this, I have lots of thoughts about this. I mean, isn't it crazy that there is, a pattern of a predictable pattern of how the swing is going to go? I mean, that actually says that democracy doesn't really work, and that messaging doesn't really work, and that media bias is probably controlling all of this. And, even in this LA Times article, there's some bias, referring to Biden's approval ratings as underwater, which is inappropriate, because they're not underwater. And I would agree they do have a messaging problem. I mean, Biden has not done hardly enough press conferences, I think he should be talking every day. And yesterday they sent Rochelle Walensky onto Fox News to talk about COVID-19. And she was terrible. She got grilled, where they basically were giving her loaded questions about the virus, and she was answering them, and she wasn't saying what you're saying is loaded and unfair and false, and you're scaring people. She needed to say these words out loud, but she hadn't had any media training. Apparently she's now getting media training. A little bit late. But the problem is that, the Fox News will now clip all of those interviews, or that interview, up into sections, condense it, and again, rewrite the narrative. Democratic campaign officials reject predictions of a gloomy November, saying they're confident they'll have a solid pitch for voters. They say Democrats are going to hold the House because we are delivering for the American people, said Representative Sean Patrick Maloney of New York, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He pointed to millions of jobs created in the last year, as well as vaccine distribution and efforts to lower healthcare costs. Yeah, I mean, this is the problem, you see. This complacency by the Democratic Party is the reason why they will likely lose. I mean, I genuinely fear that they will have huge losses. And I don't think it's because they haven't done enough. I think they've done plenty. But I just think their messaging is foolish. And even on the Democrats' own Twitter account, they create those little 1-minute videos or 30-second videos about what they've done. And they really are very poorly produced. They feel like corporate videos from the 1980s. I wish they would modernize. Homicides rise amid gentrification fears. Again, similar story. Similar foundation to this story. Wages staying the same, cost of living going up. We could probably attribute that to pretty much every news story, This kind of desperation, this dispossession of people who are like, I literally am working all hours and I still cannot afford anything. The story goes last summer, something other than COVID-19 began to trouble Eddie Ortiz. 2 LAPD detectives stopped by his coffee shop, Holy Grounds Coffee and Tea. They were investigating a shooting and wanted to view video from the security cameras. Ortiz obliged but felt unsettled. He was often hearing about cars and businesses being broken into, and now another shooting. Ortiz's informal tally was confirmed by police statistics. Crime was getting worse in El Sereno, a tight-knit, majority Latino section of Los Angeles wedged between Lincoln Heights and South Pasadena and Alhambra. Gun violence and homicides have skyrocketed citywide in the past 2 years, mirroring a surge across the nation, thought to be linked in part to the social instability from a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. In 2021, LA recorded nearly 400 homicides, the highest toll since 2007, though still well below the peaks of the early 1990s. In El Serrano, 8 people were killed last year, a marked increase from 2 or 3 in each of the last 7 years, according to the data. Yeah, it's messy, isn't it? Again, I mean, it's connected to the prevalence of firearms. You have the guns, then there's going to be more homicides, and suicides as well. It's very easy to commit suicide relatively in a country where there's a lot of guns. In England, we don't have anything like this. We don't even use the word homicide in England. Did you know that? We don't even use that word. It's not a word that's used in the British vernacular. A neglected city reinvents itself with an electric car fleet. Here we go, a little bit of good news, which is always helpful, isn't it? It says the Central Valley Outpost is one of the most fertile places on Earth, attracting thousands of seasonal laborers to harvest lettuce and reaping windfalls for big agribusiness. But for most of Ray Leon's life, the city of Huron has been a transportation desert. When he was a child, it took 3 hours and 13 stops to ride a bus, 53 miles to Fresno to visit a cousin in the hospital. He said that experience stuck with me. By the time he graduated from UC Berkeley and returned to the community to help his aging parents, little had changed. Even after he was elected Huron mayor 5 years ago, his lobbying for reliable bus routes to Fresno got nowhere. See page 5. Oh, no. Anyway, the long and short of it is that a fleet of electric cars in Huron is shuttling residents around Fresno County for free. Isn't that great? Hello, Teresa. Thank you for joining us this morning here on Backchannel. It's 9:43 here on the West Coast, 12:43 Eastern. We are discussing, we're looking at the morning papers. We're looking at the LA Times right now. But if you have a local newspaper that you would like us to talk about and review, then just drop me a line, let me know. You can talk to your device, or you can just go to backchannel.tv and message me there on the chat. Okay, let's jump now to the San Francisco Chronicle. They lead with virus fuels absences of states' legislators. As California lawmakers grapple with their duties amid an ongoing pandemic, some are choosing to spend far less time working in the corridors of the state capitol. It says the Chronicle analyzed legislators' attendance records for the past year and found a handful were frequently absent, with several missing 15 or more days in session. The tally includes dates when lawmakers didn't show up because of personal reasons. It excludes absences because of illness or work-related business. Yes, and also on the front of the San Francisco Chronicle is a photograph of Travis Gore, who completes a virtual race on his stationary bike before going to work in his San Francisco home. The return to the office? ? Many workers won't. Hybrid model gains traction as pandemic forces adjustments. This is very interesting to me. I actually have a friend in England who's written a book about this, which I really recommend to you. The book, you can get it on Amazon and wherever. The book is called Flex, and it's written by a woman for women. Flex, reinventing work for a smarter, happier life. And, this book has been years in the making. It wasn't really affected by the pandemic, but it has been updated for the pandemic. And a friend of mine, Annie, has written this book, and it's all about, especially for women who also have to deal with so much other things, especially if they're parents or they have emotional trauma that they're working through, and like how you can balance work and life, but more importantly, the additional toll of being female, because it is harder for women, both in the workplace and at home. So yeah, I recommend the book. It's called Flex, Reinventing Work for a Smarter, Happier Life. The story on the front of the San Francisco Chronicle this morning says Jessie Palmatia had only been working at her job at an East Bay non-profit for a few weeks before the pandemic forced offices to close across the Bay Area. Since then, she's been working fully remote with no end in sight. She's been back to the office only once. She said, and that was in May 2020 to grab her computer monitor. The switch definitely took some adjustment. She had to arrange her home office as she was using it, making it comfortable, filling it with all the right things. She said, once I realized how much I was saving with my commute and how much energy I had after I was done at work, I was like, this is awesome. When she needs a break, she can kick a ball around with her dog in the backyard, which beats standing around a water cooler any day. Now, as the Omicron variant once again scrambles well-laid plans, possibly killing the return to office date altogether, Palmatia, like millions of others, finds herself hoping she'll never have to work in an office full-time again. I mean, I'll be honest, I've been saying this for years. I mean, this little studio that I'm sitting in here, I could literally have done all of the work I've ever done in my life from this room. Would never have been a problem. And yet, for some reason, companies that I've worked for have wanted me to come into the building. And it makes no sense to me because, I used to work on the radio at night. What was the point in being in the building at night? What was the point? It's like, give me a break. This obsession with branding and all this type of stuff. It's like, I just don't get it. Well, in America, we've had a record number of people quitting their jobs. I think the number was 4 million that we announced last week, in the last quarter. But more importantly, I think it all came down to trust. I don't think employers trusted that their employees would work as hard at home as they do in the office. And guess what? Research suggests it's the opposite. You work harder. You work more. You're more productive. They were worried, you would take a 3-hour lunch break. It's like, think about this for a second. There is no lunch break when you work at home. You're always on. Now, the downside to this is that your employer and maybe your line manager or your boss has less respect for your hours, and they sometimes want to talk to you or text you or email you after working hours because they know you're at home and that you're working from home, so that you don't really get the chance to kind of say, no, I'm actually off work now. And there is a very clever way of dealing with this. Don't reply. Just because someone sends you a message, you don't have to reply. And, you can make a judgment as to whether or not it warrants an immediate reply. Yeah, there's a lot of society. French, they're very good at this. The Norwegians I've always been fascinated by because I worked in Norway when I was 18, and I really had a kind of grounding in how they have their work day. They start at 7 a.m. and they finish at 3. They don't take a lunch break. They just go 7 till 3. Right? So you can just go home, have the afternoon with your family, and you don't need a lunch break. You eat your lunch at your desk, and you just go 7 till 3. It's very clever. They also closed all the liquor stores on the weekend, which I thought was very clever too. I always thought that was fascinating. It's like if you want to buy alcohol, you buy it during the week. But no, it means that no one's going to get super drunk on the weekend and then stagger into an off license or a liquor store and buy more alcohol. No, all shuttered. Shuttered on the weekends. And this is what we learn about cultures when we move, when we travel, when we live in other places, that we recognize that the way it's done where we are isn't necessarily the right way or the best way. And this is why I've been saying for years, remote working from home is a great idea, especially environmentally, not having to commute or drive or take public transport. No transport. It's better for the environment than even some transport. Oh, yes, that's right. Norway has very high sugar tax as well. You know? You want to buy sugar, you got to pay for it. Sugar is so bad for you. It's insane how bad it is for you. Anyway, it's just interesting that I think the pandemic, in a roundabout way, is going to give us the gift of thinking about our workplace and our hours and our work-life balance in a different way, you know? But I do recommend that book, Flex. You should look it up. It's very good. It has like a blue cover. Restaurants shut, take precautions as infections rise. And tough rules for seaweed tool against warming. Interesting. It absorbs carbon. It reduces emissions on dairy farms. It can be used as food, fuel, and fertilizer. It requires nothing but seawater and sunlight to grow. Yes, seaweed has become a symbol of hope in mitigating climate change, and at least a half a dozen companies are actively trying to farm it in California. They aim to be part of what's called the blue economy, a movement to use the ocean's resources in a sustainable way. It's interesting, isn't it? It's not just sustainable, it's regenerative. But getting a permit to set up a seaweed farm in state waters involves navigating a permitting process that can take many years and cost many thousands of dollars. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've never really liked seaweeds to eat, but I recognize that it does have some incredible properties. And I think that my kids eat it. You buy these packs of very thin sliced, seaweed, all like mushed together, and they eat it like chips. And it makes this horrible noise like they're eating paper. So weird. So that's the LA Times this morning. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, Teresa's with us. Stacy has had to go. Kobe, thank you for joining us. And someone who's just got a hand wave. Good morning. It's 9:53 here on the West Coast. Where to next? Durango Herald, Colorado? Looks like it. Yes. They lead this morning with serving the heart of Southwest Colorado. What is a managed camp? Unhoused advocates see progress, but some campers aren't so sure. This is an interesting story about Becky Shenfield Medina. She never wanted to live at Purple Cliffs. She never wanted to sleep and walk on the muddy paths and ice slopes, her bottom wet from sliding on the ground, so she doesn't slip on her way down to the porta potties below. It's something I didn't want to face, she said. For nearly 4 years, she's been trying to find housing, but an apartment has evaded her. Left with a physical disability after a semi-truck accident, she's been waiting on disability checks that haven't come. So she's been living at Purple Cliffs since the end of the summer when her car, which she was living in, broke down. Unable to fix it with no income, she relies on others in Purple Cliffs for rides, or she must walk to the nearest bus stop about a mile away to get to the places she needs to go. She said there's a lot of people waiting, stuck in Durango, for disability. We need help. Same story. Cost of living goes up. Wages stagnant. Same story. Different story, same story. I'm telling you, everything can go back to this. Everything. So this poor girl is living in a tent. It's just nuts. And the problem is she'll be demonized now by a small percentage of the population for being homeless. We're only ever a couple of phone calls away from poverty. It really can come on very quickly. Southwest Colorado's economy rebounds. Yeah, they say this. It says the economic engines have recovered from the initial shockwaves of the pandemic, but the region remains unaffordable with housing and workforce challenges. An emerging age crisis also threatens Southwest Colorado's economy in the coming years. Fort Lewis's College School of Business Administration hosted its annual Southwest Economic Outlook on Thursday, with presenters sharing mixed bag for the region and Colorado's economy. Jobs in Region 9 decreased by about 2,700. The accommodation and food service industry lost nearly 900 jobs. I mean, I don't see how that's good news. So that's the Durango Herald this morning. And what do we have next? Oh, the Hartford Courant from Connecticut. Lovely. Meridian to launch state's pilot program. This is a pilot food scrap collection set to launch this month in 1,000 Meriden houses, is meant to spearhead a reduction in organic waste through Connecticut. Green bags will be distributed to homes for the 4-month program. The State Department of Energy Environmental Protection announced. I love the fact that they're just like starting these programs. You know, when most other countries have been processing food waste in separate containers for literally decades. I mean, I remember when I was like in my 20s going to people's houses and seeing that they had like, you know, composting sections of their food waste. The fact that we're still throwing food waste into the trash, it's like, film tax credits not worth it. Hundreds of millions spent on jobs before Disney closed shop. They said it was a Hollywood ending, but not the good kind. An executive decision made in a Disney boardroom thousands of miles away left the shuttering of Greenwich animation company Blue Sky Studios in April, leaving more than 450 people out of work. The move came after more than a decade of state support for Blue Sky Studios in the form of hundreds of millions of Connecticut taxpayer dollars and incentives aimed at creating and retaining jobs and economic activity. The most recent installment, a $32 million tax credit payment, was dispersed less than 2 weeks before the corporate parent Disney announced it was closing the shop. Also, more patients, fewer staff, and a lack of beds. Connecticut emergency departments hit by Omicron surge. Yeah, well, we're seeing this everywhere. And then finally, 9 children among 19 dead in apartment fire in New York City, caused by the faulty space heater. I mean, it's such a tragedy because, of course, these things are entirely preventable. But again, you know, the poor are left to fend for themselves. Should we do the news update in 2 minutes? It can be the short news update, the regular news update. It's not a special news update. FYI. Okay, let's see what else we have here. That was the Hartford Courant, which we've done from Connecticut. I just want to remind you that we have a growing list of shows here on Backchannel, including Haley and Allison Live, waking you up in the morning with lots of laughs and their 1-star cinema review. Or Live Every Day with Liv Harrison, live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of coffee. And also the charming and the funny Hal Rudnick, whose program, Your Pal Hal, directly follows this show at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. So there you go. Lots to look forward to, as always. Okay, next paper we're going to jump to is the Florida Union. You know, we like to do like a little Florida section. Ron DeSantis has gone like full crazy this week. I saw some interviews with him on the weekend, and I was like, wow, you really are like making up your own narrative. He does live in a completely different world. It says Governor Ron DeSantis will open the 2-month Florida legislature with his State of the State address on Tuesday, an annual tradition that's a combination, a highlight reel, and a wish list for the state's chief executive. It says with his re-election campaign underway, the Republican governor will use his speech to look back on his term before pivoting to what he wants this year from the GOP-dominated legislature. And after that, lawmakers mostly take over for the next 59 days. It's very weird, the whole kind of culture of you know, starting and stopping government and this kind of constant re-election campaign. I find it fascinating that, you know, people don't really get much time to govern before they're having to campaign again to get re-elected. In England, they turned, elections into fixed 5-year terms, which I thought was actually very good. I feel like, you know, the public services take years to turn. You know, if you want to kind of redirect the services, new policies. If you implement a new policy, it takes you a year to kind of get it signed off. Then it takes another year for it to come into service. And so what are you left with? That's kind of it. You have to then try and get re-elected. So I've always felt that a 5-year fixed term is kind of better, but, better for the UK, not necessarily better for America, certainly not better for Florida. It says there's nothing stopping DeSantis, a candidate for re-election in November, from raising cash, and his policy pitches, proposed salary hikes and bonuses for law enforcement, firefighters, teachers and others, certainly looks like stuff ready to be touted on the campaign trail this year. He's being challenged by, I think, 3 Democrats. Agriculture Commissioner Nikki Fried, former Republican Governor Charlie Crist, now a St. Petersburg congressman. Interesting. Number 1 trash item on beaches may soon be banned. It said not all butts are welcome on Florida beaches. They're pushing a bill that would ban smoking in public beaches and areas with the boundaries of state parks, in a move that's been tried before but never succeeded. Florida's most precious resource is the beach, they said. People want to enjoy their experience without having to deal with secondhand smoke and the litter of cigarette butts left behind. It's time to get the bad butts off the beach and get the butts on the beach that we want. That rhetoric can only work in America. Okay, let's take a 2-minute pause for the US News Update now. It's a podcast that I do every day where you get a chance to download and find out what's happening across the country. Here it is. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. More than 800,000 non-citizens and dreamers in New York City will have access to the ballot box and vote in municipal elections as early as next year, after Mayor Eric Adams allowed legislation to automatically become law on Sunday. Opponents have vowed to challenge the new law, which the City Council approved a month ago. Unless a judge halts its implementation, New York City is the first major U.S. city to grant widespread municipal voting rights to non-citizens. More than a dozen communities across the U.S. already allow non-citizens to cast ballots in local elections, including 11 towns in Maryland and 2 in Vermont. Non-citizens still wouldn't be able to vote for president or members of Congress in federal races or in the state elections that pick the governor, judges, and legislators. The Board of Elections must now begin drawing an implementation plan by July, including voter registration rules and provisions that will create ballots for municipal races to prevent non-citizens from casting ballots in federal and state contests. The current explosion of Omicron-fueled coronavirus infections in the US is causing a breakdown in basic functions and services, the latest illustration of how COVID-19 keeps upending life more than 2 years into the pandemic. First responders, hospitals, schools and government agencies have employed an all-hands-on-deck approach to keep the public safe, but they are worried how much longer they can keep it up. The Omicron variant spreads even more easily than other coronavirus strains, and vaccination and a booster still offer strong protection from serious illness, hospitalization, and death. Your daily US News Update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel. There it is, the US News Update, which is a daily podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts. That comes to you from Volley, creators of Backchannel. It's 5 after 10 here on the West Coast, 5 after 1 Eastern. It's the 10th of January, 2022. And welcome to the show. I'm Anthony Davis. This is The Anthony Davis Show, and we're here every weekday between 9 and 11 Pacific. That's 12 and 2 Eastern. We've been looking at the morning papers this morning before we get into the nitty-gritty of our conversations, although we do have conversations throughout our paper review. It kind of sparks what it is that we're looking to talk about today, and then we go into some more detail after the paper review. We've been looking at the Florida Times Union this morning, talking about cigarette butts being banned from the beach there. And so if you happen to be living in an area with a local newspaper and you'd like us to review it, then we can easily do that. You just have to let me know what it is, and we'll kind of, Take a little look. Florida today leads with COVID-19 spike in schools. I mean, it's so interesting. DeSantis has been a lot of mixed messaging on COVID. I'm putting that nicely. And he definitely had COVID the last few weeks and was like hiding it from people. He was so ill on camera a couple of weeks ago, and then he went missing for 2 weeks and still won't admit to having COVID. And yet the numbers in Florida are through the roof now. It says here in Brevard Public Schools, since students return from break, some parents are pushing for the district to increase COVID-19 mitigation strategies. I mean, this is a state where they don't allow children to wear masks, or children that do wear masks get ridiculed. From Tuesday to Thursday, the district saw 486 COVID cases, 156 of them employees and 330 of them students. Students only returned on Thursday. BPS releases COVID-19 data twice weekly, and the case numbers released on Friday resemble those of early fall when cases began to surge in the district. The cases are a sharp uptick from the district's previous report. And there's a photograph of a small group of pro-mask supporters with Families for Safe Schools out along Judge Fran Jameson Way in front of the school board, waving signs at passing cars. Mums for Public Health. Mask saves lives. It's so crazy to me that mums of children, like parents of children, who just want to keep their children safe, are having to go on a picket line. It just makes no sense to me. They're having to protest in public to say, please wear a mask, because it's not for their own kids. I'm sure their own kids are wearing masks. It's for the other kids. It's just a mask. It's like a basic thing, you wouldn't want a surgeon to perform open heart surgery on you and not wear a mask. You wouldn't. You'd be like, something, leave off your mask, leave off your gloves, don't wash your hands, just we'll see what happens. We'll just take that risk. Then there's a cartoon of a CEO with dollar signs in his eyes, like jumping out of a prison. And the headline is Inmate Income. Prisoners have to pay to communicate the way the rest of us do for free. It's highly exploitative and centered around getting as much money as they can out of the family. Interesting. Says the Florida Department of Corrections defends its decision to turn to a company called JPay to digitize inmate mail by arguing the delivery system is crucial to preventing the flow of dangerous contraband such as fentanyl into its 143 state prison facilities. Wow! There's 143 prisons in Florida. Wow! That's a lot of incarcerated people. Well, yeah, America incarcerates more people than anybody in the world. And some people correlate it to just modern slavery in a way. Because, there's a large proportion of people in these prisons who are African American. And a lot of people in prisons are having to work for slave wages, like $1 a day to make stuff that is sold. It's like, really? This is still happening? Left unsaid is that JPay controlling the flow of mail to 80,000 Florida inmates is likely to greatly enhance company profits, with dollars spent by inmates and their loved ones, a segment of the population often hard-pressed to make ends meet. They say prisoners have to pay to communicate the way the rest of us do for free, said Wanda Bertram, spokeswoman for the Prison Policy Initiative, which is an advocacy group for incarcerated persons. She said it's highly exploitative and centered around getting as much money as they can out of the family. I mean, I think there is an attitude from many Americans that the moment someone is incarcerated, they should lose all of their rights, including the right to vote. So that's the Florida Today newspaper as part of the Today network, you know. Chanel has joined us. Good morning. Will, hello. Thank you for joining us in California. This is What's the Gossip from California. I mean, the only real gossip here at the moment is that it stopped raining, which is nice because, you know, we had like the most insane rains in California. So that's the gossip. And also, you know, coronavirus numbers are up. Let's go to Illinois now for the Journal Star. I think this might be our final newspaper for the moment. Businesses get cash infusion from British investors. There's a story out of Peoria. It's a distiller getting international attention. It says J.K. Williams has received a significant investment from British entrepreneur Rory Sweet and his wife Elizabeth. Said the company president Andy Farris. I'm just so obsessed with myself, just desperate to insert myself into any story. I can't say it's our largest single investment to date of our outside investors by about 10 times. Oh, I can say. Oh, sorry. My eyesight is so terrible these days. The money will help the business expand distribution into neighboring states, who is hoping to start selling J.K. Williams products in Missouri, Minnesota, Indiana, and Kentucky this year. The company expanded distribution into Wisconsin last year. So it's like an ingredient of whiskey, you know. It's a distiller. So they're using locally grown corn, and they're doing all of this distilling themselves. And I mean, you know, it's often when in times of crisis, people do tend to turn to alcohol. And this is why I guess there are people wanting to invest in distilleries, because they know that life is getting worse for people, and so there are more people going to be hitting the drink. It's such a terrible thing. Killing of social workers causes alarm. Safety questions raised after second such incident in Illinois in 4.5 years. It says Illinois officials are seeking answers after the killing last week of a state child welfare worker during a home visit, the second such tragedy to occur in less than 5 years. Deirdre Silas, an investigator with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, was stabbed to death last Thursday when she responded to a call of possible endangerment of children in a home in the central Illinois town of Thayer. A man related to one or more of the 6 children who were at home at the time, 32-year-old Benjamin Reed, is being held in the Sangamon County Jail without bond on first-degree murder and other charges. And finally here it says lawmakers pass second measure to clarify criminal justice reform. Illinois lawmakers passed a bill clarifying issues around the massive criminal justice reform bill that passed with the support of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus last year. On a 67-42 vote, the House voted on Wednesday to accept a Senate amendment to the House bill clarifying issues relating to petrol services, detainee phone calls, and moving back effective dates in the police decertification system and body camera footage labeling. So there we go. That's the Journal Star for this Monday morning from Illinois. Let's turn our attention to the climate crisis now. We want to talk about the fate of the planet. This is because of new research that shows that US planet warming emissions rebounded in 2021 after a pandemic-related slowdown in 2020. So I'm kind of interested to know from you, and you can message me via the Backchannel chat facility. Just go to backchannel.tv on your browser. But, you know, how conscious are you? Because I think that we're so obsessed now with, obviously, the pandemic and working and trying to, like, you know, just get on with our lives, that are you, like, super climate conscious, or have you let it slip recently? You know, do you believe you can make a difference as an individual, in a community, in your school and business? Because new research in the US planet warming emissions rebounded in 2021 after a pandemic-related slowdown in 2020. The preliminary estimate from research shows that greenhouse gas emissions increased by 6.2% when compared to last 2020, but still remained 5% lower than in 2019. I mean, it's a bit like jobs, isn't it? You know, there was this huge drop, and obviously there's going to be a rebound, but it's whether or not it rebounds more than what it was pre-pandemic because the pandemic has kind of upended everything. In 2020, both the economy and fuel use slowed down as people remained in their homes due to the pandemic. The burning of fossil fuels is the biggest driver of climate change. Well, both were expected to increase in 2021 as many people in the US became vaccinated and began traveling more. But Rhodium Group's findings indicate that emissions rebounded a little more quickly than the economy overall, as GDP grew 5.7% year over year. The research attributes this to an increase in the use of coal to generate power, which was up 17%, and a rapid rebound in road transportation, particularly freight. It says the coal increase marked the first increase since 2014 for a fuel that has largely been declining. When it's burned, coal contributes more to climate change than other fuels, including other fossil fuels like oil and gas. I mean, my feeling about this is that we're living now at a time where we're basically overdue. It's kind of done now. We're not going to hit our targets. It's been said that the Paris targets that were set in 2015 are now, we're never going to get to that. It's already been said. We've missed the target. Because they wanted to keep it at 1.5 degrees below pre-industrial levels, right? That's kind of what the Paris Climate Accord said. And the reality is now that we're not going to hit that target. But that doesn't mean that we should give up. And this is what I worry about more than anything else, is that we are now living in a world where we're playing catch-up. We've got so much more catching up to do. And I was looking at CES this morning, the Consumer Electronics Show out of Las Vegas, and they were showing all of the new technology. And, Sony have brought out an electric car, and the Silverado, the truck that everybody loves to buy in America. They're now going to make an electric version of that with a 400-mile range. And, things are changing, but is it quick enough? Is it fast enough? Because the majority of cars sold in the US are still gas. And my view is that if you are socially and environmentally conscious, how is it possible that you could go into a store or a dealership and buy a gas car in 2022? How can you consciously do that with any conscience at all? But the problem is people can't afford it, because electric cars are more expensive. And, dealers are not pushing electric cars. Dealers don't make as much money on electric cars. So they're pushing gas cars. They're desperate to sell as many gas cars as they can before these rules, in 2035 come in. So, there's just no concerted effort to deal with this from all angles. It's all about money, isn't it? Sell the cars, make as much money as you can, buy the cars, and save as much money as you can. It's nothing to do with climate change. It's nothing to do with emissions. Not enough people care. Following the onset of the pandemic in 2020, millions of people switched to working from home. Car and aeroplane travel plummeted. Industrial output slowed. This led to a sharp drop in greenhouse gas emissions, spurring predictions that the newly shaped American economy would emerge to help banish the era of fossil fuels. That was my view. That's what I was hoping for. But the forecasts may well have been baseless, with new research showing that US emissions rose by 6.2% last year compared to 2020. Emissions are still 5% down on 2019 levels. But my point is, and this is what we've been talking about today, the leap in emissions was largely down to an increase in cars and trucks on the road, with a 10% growth in transportation emissions from a year previous, as Americans started moving again amid optimism spurned by the rollout of vaccines. We have very short memories, don't we? This is really the problem. Michael, good morning. Michael's in Virginia. You're very welcome. Lots of people also watching and listening on YouTube. Thank you for joining us there as well. Nice to know that you're part of the show. Sorry about my construction project. This is kind of halfway through. I might try and finish it today. I've been waiting for my foam tiles to grow before I stick them to the walls, you know? So just out here, behind this, because there's a door here. You can't really see it, but there's a door here. There's just foam tiles everywhere, slowly. It's taken like 2 weeks for these tiles to grow. So crazy. Apparently you can submerge them in water to make them grow quickly. And then you can like dry them out. But there's not been enough sun to dry anything out in this weather at the moment. Well, I'd like to keep the blue sides. I mean, it's hard to say, really. You know, I could bring the black to kind of here, and so that only I see the blue section. I think what the blue sides do is that they show depth, you know? Depth is good. Well, no, what I'll need to do is get a light back here so that kind of backlights me a little bit so you can see my outline. I only wear black. I don't have any colored clothes. I only have black clothes. That's the tragedy. I'm like permanently in mourning. Like Queen Victoria. I'm not a goth. I'm definitely not a goth. Coal is the dirtiest fossil fuel. It's been in steady decline in the US, also made an unwelcome return, with its use in power generating posting a 17% increase on 2020. Emissions from industrial processes rose by 6.6% last year, while emissions from the use of buildings edged up slightly. It says US emissions have been on a gradual decline since around 2005, primarily because of market conditions that have made coal uncompetitive and gas, a less polluting fossil fuel, attractive to utilities as a cheap and abundant alternative. I mean, it's just beggars belief, isn't it? There's all this rhetoric and all this talk in California, you know, is like one of the most progressive states in the country. And still, it's you know, seeing a rise in fossil fuel use. Despite more than 3 decades of increasingly urgent warnings from climate scientists and a growing parade of catastrophic wildfires and floods and heat waves, the US has never put in place any national legislation to deal with the climate crisis. It's critical that Congress passes climate measures. The governor here is Gavin Newsom. And he's very progressive, even though he is married or was once married to Kimberly Guilfoyle, which I'll never understand. The climate measures in the Build Back Better spending bill were stalled by Senator Joe Manchin, the right-wing Democrat, supposedly, from West Virginia, who has deep ties to the coal industry. Of course he does. So, you know, you're never, ever going to get... It's just never... I just can't see it changing. I mean, I am an optimistic person, and yet I just feel like it's... I just can't see it changing. I can't see guns being regulated. I can't see fossil fuel being reduced. I mean, it's just... I just can't see it happening. I hear a lot about it. I say a lot about it. I talk a lot about it. I read a lot about it. And yet, you know, in terms of like actual fundamental change, when's it going to happen? We should be building solar farms and wind farms the entire stretch of this country. Like the whole of the United States, any flat surface, anywhere, you know, the desert, the salt flats, like all of these huge, amazing landscape should be filled with solar and wind energy generation. Filled with it. Everywhere. Every spare piece of land that isn't used for agriculture. In a way that you can allow cattle or animals to migrate and roam. You know, you should think about that. Because, of course, that's something that they don't really think about. They certainly didn't think about that when they built Donald Trump's wall, you know, about animals migrating. You hear about that? That was a huge story. Well, if you build a wall right across the southern border, how are animals supposed to migrate? How are certain animals supposed to find water and food if there's a wall? It's so selfish. The wall is like hundreds of miles long. Fortunately, they didn't finish building it, and fortunately, some of it now is being taken down. But it's being taken down not just to allow, migration, legal migration to happen in a normal, less totalitarian fashion, but also so that animals can live their lives again without being like, hang on a second, I used to be able to walk here. There was never any mention of the animal kingdom, was there? Animals that need to head south. Nothing. I mean, it's not like a Disney film, animals are not going to be able to hitch a ride on a goose. The uptick in emissions in 2021 has thrown the US off track in the rate of cuts required to meet the internationally agreed targets included in the Paris Climate Accords. Hello, John. Thank you for joining us in Pennsylvania. The deal states that countries must keep the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, a point beyond which scientists warn the world will face dire consequences. So we've already got over that. I mean, it's like we are going to see dire consequences. And then we'll end up using more air conditioning to stay cool from the heat. And more air conditioning means more gas, because, of course, AC puts out gas. Michael Mann, a climate scientist at Penn State University, said there was progress at COP26, but there needs to be much more. And for the US to be able to do its part, we need climate provisions of Build Back Better to pass Congress as soon as possible. I mean, if the Democrats are going to lose the houses in the midterms, which is highly likely, then forget any chance of any climate change legislation being passed. It just won't happen. Because, we're so deeply politicized here in the US that it's like it's almost like they don't want to do stuff just because Democrats thought of it. And if you own the libs, then you just prevent the libs from doing anything. There's absolutely no concept of actually, this might be better for all of us. I'm not even talking about bipartisanship. I'm talking about a Republican Party that acknowledges there's a climate crisis and actually chooses to do policies to deal with it. They won't. They just won't. And how is it possible that half the country cannot believe in climate change? I don't believe that's true. I genuinely believe that, that the majority of the country understands that climate change is real and it needs to be tackled. But there is this attitude of this NIMBYism, not in my backyard. You can erect one of those wind turbines, but I don't want to see it. Producer Carla, saying to me that she has a friend who has bottles of water, Evian water, and Carla's judging her for that. And I agree. I've never bought bottled water. The only time I've ever bought bottled water is if I'm driving on the freeway and I need water to stop and I have to go and buy a little bottle. But I would never have bottled water in the house. And yet, people do it all the time. In fact, people only buy bottled water. It's just water. Unless, of course, you're in Flint, Michigan. And then it's water with lead. Yeah, I used to drink London tap water. It was delicious, And if you put a slice of lemon in it, it changes everything. There it is, you see? A little slice of lemon. Changes everything. Takes away the taste of the chlorine. I have become a little judgy as well about people who just drive big gas cars, Because, I have said before that soon it's going to be the case that Democrats will be buying electric cars and Republicans will be driving gas. You'll literally be able to hear Republicans coming because of the engine noise. But my neighbors here who are not, right-wing in any way, but they don't care about using the air conditioning. They turn it on all the time, in hot weather and in cold weather. And I never turn the AC on in my place. I just have little oil heaters. An oil heater is very... I know it's got oil in it, so you think that might be defeating the object, but it's only a little bit of oil that fills these fins. And the oil stays in there. You don't replace the oil, it's fixed. And then the oil is heated. It's an oil heater. And it's a radiator. It puts out a lot of heat. And that's the point of having these little, storage heaters. They're just, it's not a storage heater, so that's a different technology. You have space heaters that start fires in apartment blocks. You have storage heaters that store heat in the day and then put it out at night. You have convection heaters. And then you have the oil heater that I have. I have two. And I only want to heat the room that I'm in. Because the problem with air conditioning and central air, as it's called, is that you end up heating the entire home. And you're only in one room for half the time. And it's like, seriously? You think that's acceptable? Lee has joined us. Good morning, Lee, from Minnesota. Riyadh is in California. John is with us in Pennsylvania. Michael, good morning. Chanel, good morning. And Michelle. It's great to know that you're part of Backchannel this morning. It's 10:32 here on the West Coast. 1:32 Eastern. Kobe's with us and Teresa as well. And Stacey had to go. So we're looking this morning at the emissions situation. We've been asking this morning if you are still conscious of the fate of the planet. Do you feel optimistic or disillusioned? Do you believe that you could make a difference as an individual, as a community in your school or business? Because this is after new research shows that planet warming emissions rebounded in 2021 after a pandemic-related slowdown in 2020. So this is really the subject of a lot of conversation, not just here on Backchannel, but everywhere, everywhere. So how do we take this on as individuals? How do we try and do our bit? What can we even do? And it's a difficult thing for Joe Biden, isn't it? Because, if you've got emissions surging during his tenure, then that is going to... The thing is, that the other side will criticize him for that. And yet, if they were to win, they won't do anything about it. Trump rolled back all of these environmental protections. He left the Paris Climate Accord. He was making a point. He doesn't care. He doesn't even know what climate change is. We've had this conversation before, but he always referred to it as clean air and clean water. I want America to have the cleanest air and the cleanest water. Sir, yes, sir, that's not climate change. You idiot. Energy analysts had expected to see a rebound of planet warming emissions in 2021, but even so, the growth outpaced expectations. They say emissions grew even faster than the economic recovery that was largely in the rebound in coal generation. There aren't any significant policies to make economic growth less carbon intensive. And they say that coal was a big driver of the rebound in emissions. Makes me sad, I don't want to feel that no one's doing enough or people collectively aren't doing enough. I mean, I worry even when I recycle and I take the trash out that it's just going to landfill. I don't trust that the local authority is recycling everything. The price of recycling materials is volatile, and so they tend to only recycle it when they can get a good price for it. But otherwise, they'll just stick it in the trash and bury it with everything else. And when I think about landfill, I just have images of children in Africa and India climbing on these huge mounds of scavenging for stuff. I mean, in India, the children scavenge for a living, and they look for like semiconductor parts and reusables for electronics, and they're paid to find reusables. And actually, it is very environmentally friendly to find these things. The child labor aspect of it, I have a bit of a problem with. But, you know, there is this desire to like make use of everything that is thrown away because poverty requires them to. But America is such a rich country that we just throw stuff away. I mean, the food waste here is insane. I have a friend who used to work for a very wealthy family, very famous family. And for dinner, every night, you know, she worked as an assistant and a driver and stuff. For dinner, they would have to order for this wealthy family from like 5 different takeaway places. And they would put all the food out on the table because they couldn't make their mind up what they wanted. So they would get sushi, and they would get pizza, and they would get Thai, and they would get burgers, and they would all be laid out. And of course the family, there's only like 4 people in the family. And they would come down and they would like just take what they wanted, 1 slice of pizza or whatever, and then they would disappear. And what happened to the food? My friend would say, could I take some of the food home? Because, you know, obviously it's going to go to waste. And the policy in the house was no. You cannot take the food. So it would be trashed. It would be trashed. And there's a lot of wealthy families in the US that are doing this, that are buying. I mean, I have another friend who just got a job working for a very well-known singer, female singer. And she said she is getting to take food home because they overorder. They have so much food. And they do give it to the staff to eat, to take it home. But just the over-ordering. It just makes me really sad, the idea that, you know, you would order way more than you need. Just so that you have choice. I mean, why not make the choice in your head before you place the order? Say, okay, tonight I want Thai. Don't order Italian and Spanish and French and have it all sitting there. Yeah, the argument of keeping the economy going is not true, because that's again like trickle-down economics. I just don't think it works. You know, trickle-down economics is what the, you know, right-wing people would say about, you know, why these companies shouldn't pay much tax at the top. You know? They employ people, and if you employ people, then the people who are employed will pay tax. And the more people you employ, the more people will pay tax. And it's like, no. The proportion of tax paid by employees who are earning a 50th of what the CEO is earning will never be as much as what the CEO is entitled to pay in tax. I mean, look at Elon Musk, you know? Deciding that he's going to give Twitter a poll to decide how much he should pay in tax, you know, how many shares he should sell. The whole thing was a stunt. He still paid way less tax than he owed. It was a stunt just to get the IRS off his back, I guess, and to, you know, give the impression that he is a good, you know, civic person. But as far as I know, he's also a donor to the Republican Party. It's 10:39. This is Backchannel. It's the 10th of January, 2022. I'm Anthony Davis. This is the Anthony Davis Show. Welcome to the program. We are discussing the climate crisis and looking at the increase in emissions. And with an increase comes, you know, more trouble. And hello to our community of people who are listening and part of the show. Lee and Riyadh and John, Michael, Chanel, Michelle, Kobe and Teresa. Thank you for being part of the show this morning. And don't forget, you can talk back and have your say at any point in this program. All you have to do is go to backchannel.tv and you can message from there. Or if you're listening on an Echo Show device, just say the wake-up word followed by say and then your message. And if you want to give us some feedback as well, you can leave a review at backchannel.tv, and you can also give us some pointers of what you would like to see from our shows here on Backchannel. So all feedback is welcome at this stage in the project. I also wanted to talk about the Ukraine crisis. We'll do this kind of briefly because I also want to, talk a little bit later about Bob Saget. Bob Saget. I keep thinking of Bob Saget, in the Silver Bullet Band, but that's not who we're talking about at all. He's completely fine. Don't worry. I'm hearing some weird noises here. What is that? Hang on a second. It's the strangest noise I ever heard. Oh, I know what it is. I think the cleaners. I think they messaged me and said the cleaners were coming today. I think it might be someone hoovering upstairs, like vacuuming. I think they must be right above my head. I've never heard that noise before. And it really sounds, I always worry there's an earthquake or, something, a natural disaster. We're living in a time where that's the case. But I think it must be, you probably can't hear it. Because the soundproofing of this building, of this studio is so good. But it really sounded like someone had a wrench. They were trying to take this studio apart piece by piece. But I think it might be someone vacuuming above because the neighbor messaged me and said, someone's going to come and, do some cleaning. So funny. It was like really terrifying just then. Do you remember a few weeks ago on the show, I was like, I think there's an earthquake right now. Like I felt some movement. So should we talk for a few minutes about Ukraine? Because of course this is going to come to a head, isn't it? Do you think the USA should be getting involved in the Russia-Ukraine crisis? Senior diplomats from the US and Russia are meeting in the Swiss city of Geneva for the first of a series of crunch talks aimed at diffusing tensions over Ukraine. The stakes for these talks on today, are very high, but both sides hold wildly different expectations. The US and other Western powers want to dissuade Russia from invading Ukraine, but Russia wants to talk about its maximalist demands for NATO to retreat from Eastern Europe. It's calling for NATO to pull its forces out of former Soviet countries and any Eastern expansion and rule out Ukraine joining the NATO alliance. It's very interesting, isn't it? This whole concept that Russia thinks that it does have ownership of Ukraine. Crimea, as they call it. And Ukraine is like on its own, and then you've got America wanting to support Ukraine, but not support Russia. And it's basically it's a territory that is disputed fundamentally. Some US officials fear the demands that Russia are making are deliberately unrealistic, designed to be rejected and used as a pretext for military action. Other diplomats believe the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, is aiming high to squeeze concessions out of a Western alliance that's willing to give ground to avoid war. Well, I don't know that people here really think about why America would necessarily be involved in this. But, why is it important that these talks are being held? Does it make you proud to be American, to know that America is trying to be a peacekeeping force outside of the confines of the United States? To be a world leader in negotiations like this? Or do you think Biden should be solely focusing on the USA right now? Do you remember Trump's perfect phone call with the leader of Ukraine? It was a perfect phone call. Perfect. I'm a big fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm with Larry David, and the last episode of the new series, the new season, actually stars the guy who was the whistleblower for the perfect phone call. Do you remember? They've created, there's a whole scene where Larry makes a phone call and it's overheard by Colonel Alexander Vindman, who happens to be using his toilet at the time. I won't tell you any more than that, but I just want you to know it's brilliant. It's just brilliant. And the fact that Vindman was prepared to be in this episode and it'd be like, Larry, I overheard your phone call and I'm going to have to report it to the authorities. It's just brilliant. It's a stroke of genius. Larry's like, why? And Vindman's like, I'm just doing my job. It's so good. The perfect phone call. Who says that a phone call is perfect? I mean, do you remember that when Trump was talking? Because this is when he was asking Vladimir Zelensky to investigate Hunter Biden. Do you remember? So he was trying to rig the election. And so, who says that a phone call is perfect? Like just pairing the word perfect with phone call. How can something like a phone call, which has no grounding or basis in direction, there's no such thing as a perfect phone call, because a phone call by definition is a conversation, and a conversation can veer in any direction. So it can't be perfect. It can be exciting, or it can be interesting, or it can be useful, or it can be, and it can certainly be varied and surprising and extreme, but it can never be perfect. By definition, a phone call cannot be perfect. A meal can be perfect. You know? A friendship can be perfect. A romance can be perfect. To you. It's subjective, but it can still, in your view, be that. But a phone call cannot be perfect by nature of the fact that it's a phone call. There are two people involved. There's no grounds for, you could say a romance could be perfect because you can hit all the markers. But there are no markers for a phone call. And this is why I couldn't understand why Trump, at the time, paired the word perfect with phone call. Who's ever said that before? It's very interesting to me. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about Ukraine today because I think that the news is going to change quite rapidly on that. We might end up talking about it a lot tomorrow, But I am conscious that there is going to be a perfect phone call later on today. And we'll find out what the result of that will be. And hopefully Colonel Vindman will be listening in. Should we have a little look at the life of Bob Saget? This is the US actor and comedian, best known for starring in the sitcom Full House. He's died suddenly at the age of 65, his family have announced. He was found unresponsive by staff in his room at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Orlando, Florida on Sunday. Officers from the Orange County Sheriff's Department arrived after a call from hotel staff and pronounced him dead at the scene. The exact details surrounding his death remain unclear at the moment, but in a short statement posted to Twitter, the Sheriff's Department said that detectives had found no signs of foul play or drug use during initial inquiries. Yeah, it's interesting for me. I need to work a little harder to have empathy to understand quite how present this guy probably was in your childhood and your adolescence and growing up and seeing Full House on, I guess it was on ABC or one of the major networks. The family said, "We're devastated to confirm that our beloved Bob passed away today. He was everything to us, and we want you to know how much he loved his fans, performing live and bringing people from all walks of life together with laughter." I think that losing somebody who's a national treasure in such a kind of, what's the word? I think it's that you don't want people to die alone, fundamentally, isn't it? That we really want to know that people are surrounded by loved ones and know that they're loved. And I mean, we won't know what happened to Bob Saget for a while, I'm sure, but it's like if you die alone in a hotel and you're found by a cleaner, I mean, that's not really how you necessarily want to die. And I think for people like, a veteran comic who he'd actually just started a new comedy tour across the US. His last gig was on Saturday in Jacksonville, Florida. And after the show, he expressed his joy at being back on stage in a post on Instagram, telling fans he was happily addicted to his craft. The family said that he was everything to us. We want you to know how much he loved his fans, performing live and bringing people from all walks of life together with laughter. But it's just interesting, isn't it, that a character like that is really the type of character that you do not want to kind of die alone in a hotel room. That's really the point that I'm making. He was the iconic father from Full House, Danny Tanner, or maybe you might recognize him from his work on America's Funniest Home Videos, or Entourage, or Dumb and Dumber, or How I Met Your Mother. But whatever the case, there's no doubt that Bob was a major player in comedy. Originally, though, he wanted to become a doctor. Going from wanting to be a doctor to wanting to be a comedian and an actor is quite the contrast. But nonetheless, before being encouraged by one of his English professors in college to pursue a career in the performing arts, Robert Durst has just died. Just got an alert. 78 years of age. That's Robert Durst. It's a quick news flash that we just got there. He actually looked like he was dead for the last few years, wasn't he, when you saw him on trial? He literally, I've never seen anybody look more close to death than Robert Durst, so that's no surprise, really. He was recently convicted, I think. But back to another dead person. I mean, it's so sad that we're kind of doing this kind of roll call of death right now. But Bob Saget wrote a book called Dirty Daddy. He says, I definitely pay homage to Full House. There's a lot of references, he said. I cover everything. It's a cultural thing. There's a certain kind of cultural iconic thing with it. Because the show is so immensely popular, it's funny because the critics never liked the old one and people just did. Interesting. He credits Full House with changing his entire life. He explained that he felt Full House gave him an iconic reputation, similarly to any of the cast members from Friends or Seinfeld, and he said he is forever grateful. He started doing comedy when he was 17. He said he had wild jokes from the start. He said, my first joke was, I have the brain of a German Shepherd and the body of a 16-year-old boy. They're in my car. Do you want to see them? It's all in the timing. His pre-show ritual was to spend 30 minutes in complete solitude. He said, before the show, I have no one around me for half an hour. I learned that being on Broadway. That half an hour is sacred. Everyone focuses. The whole idea is to have the kind of a meditated attitude before the show. As a comedian, you pace around and you look up your material and you try and remember it all. So if you have any memories, positive, hopefully, of Bob Saget, then I would love to hear from you on this subject. I never watched Full House, so I don't have that kind of connection with him because it wasn't shown in the UK. But I recognize his face, obviously, from so many movies and things. And I think that, he was only 65. And that's really not enough of an age, is it, for somebody who has kind of iconic status in a culture. But and also I think it's interesting for anybody, a little bit like who did we lose the other day? Who was the actress that died from the Golden Girls? Betty White. I mean, I also really enjoy seeing people age in the public eye. So if you've been watching Bob Saget, then, he is obviously very different now to how he was. Betty White has kind of looked the same for 50 years. But my point is that when they start as like young actors and then they age in front of the public view, we kind of feel closer to them because we've enjoyed watching them age and, makes us feel better about ourselves aging, I guess. Listen, thank you for joining me. I've really enjoyed you today. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Stay with Backchannel for your pal Hal. He's next.